Detective Ethan Graves had spent years chasing criminals through the shadows of the city, but nothing had prepared him for this. The closer he got to Mr. H, the more dangerous the game became. Kincaid, the enforcer, the man who cleaned up after Mr. H, was the key to unlocking everything. But finding him meant walking deeper into the abyss. The sound of rain taps lightly against the window. Inside, it's quieter, the hum of the city distant but ever present. The faint ticking of a clock echoes in the background. Graves sits in his dimly lit apartment, looking over notes and photographs. His breath is heavy, tired but focused. Graves sat alone in his apartment, the rain outside matching the storm that brewed in his mind. The photos on the table in front of him were a map of connections: Victoria Langston, Harrison, Zhao, and now Kincaid. He had been following Kincaid's trail for days, but the man was like a ghost, always one step ahead. The phone buzzed, pulling Graves from his thoughts. It was Charlie, the young officer who had been helping Graves with the case. Charlie had news someone had spotted Kincaid. It wasn't much, but it was enough. Graves' chair creaks as he stands, his footsteps slow and deliberate as he heads for the door. Graves grabbed his coat, the weight of the investigation hanging heavy on his shoulders. He knew that if he found Kincaid, he'd be closer to finding Mr. H, but he also knew that every step toward the truth put him deeper in the crosshairs. The door clicks shut behind him, and the sound of rain grows louder as Graves steps outside. The rain continues to fall harder now against metal rooftops and broken pavement. The wind whistles through the deserted industrial area, adding a sense of desolation to the scene. Graves' footsteps echo as he moves cautiously down a narrow alleyway. The industrial district was a wasteland of abandoned factories and crumbling warehouses, left behind by a city that had moved on. It was the perfect place for someone like Kincaid to hide. Graves moved quietly through the shadows, his senses on high alert. He could feel it. Kincaid was close. The sound of gravel crunching underfoot, distant footsteps from someone else moving in the dark. Graves slows his pace, listening intently. Then, Graves heard it, a faint sound, barely noticeable over the rain. Footsteps, slow and deliberate, coming from the shadows ahead. He drew his gun, his eyes scanning the darkness. Kincaid was there, he could feel it. The footsteps stop. A tense silence fills the air, broken only by the sound of rain and wind. Graves' breathing grows heavier, tension building. For a moment, everything was still. Then, out of the darkness, a voice spoke low, calm, and filled with menace. "You shouldn't have come here, Detective," Kincaid said. "This isn't a place for people who ask too many questions." The voice of Kincaid is rough, hardened by years of working in the shadows. Graves remains silent, but the tension is palpable. Graves didn't respond. He stepped forward, his gun still raised, his eyes searching for the source of the voice. But Kincaid was a master at this game. He moved like a shadow, slipping in and out of sight with ease. A pause, the sound of movement in the dark as Kincaid shifts positions. Kincaid's voice echoed through the alley again. "You want answers, Graves? You won't find them here. The people I work for, they don't leave loose ends." Graves takes a slow breath, his grip tightening on the gun. Graves had heard enough. He stepped forward, into the darkness, but Kincaid was already gone. The alley was empty, save for the sound of rain and the distant rumble of thunder. Graves lowers his gun slowly, his breathing steady but heavy. Footsteps retreat into the distance as Graves walks away. Kincaid had slipped through his fingers, but Graves knew he wouldn't stay hidden for long. He had rattled Kincaid's cage, and now it was only a matter of time before Kincaid made his next move. The sound of Graves' footsteps fades as he exits the alleyway, leaving the rain and shadows behind. Police station, early morning. The sound of gravel crunching underfoot, distant footsteps from someone else moving in the dark. Graves slows his pace, listening intently. The soft murmur of voices fills the air, phones ringing in the distance, the hum of office activity growing as the station comes to life in the early hours of the morning. Graves walks through the station, his footsteps tired but determined. Back at the station, Graves went over everything again, the connections, the clues, the players in this deadly game. Victoria Langston's murder had been the first move, but it was clear now that Mr. H was playing a much bigger game. And Kincaid was just another pawn on the board. Graves stops at his desk, flipping through papers. The sound of a chair creaking as he sits down heavily. Charlie had been digging up more information on Kincaid, trying to track his movements. He handed Graves a folder filled with old reports and surveillance photos. Kincaid had been involved in several high-profile cases, but every time he had slipped away, leaving nothing behind but bodies. The sound of a folder being opened, papers rustling. The footsteps stop. A tense silence fills the air, broken only by the sound of rain and wind. Graves' breathing grows heavier, tension building. Graves studied the photos, his eyes narrowing as he recognized some of the faces. Kincaid hadn't just been cleaning up after Mr. H. He had been doing his dirty work for years. But there was something hidden in the layers of Kincaid's past. The sound of a phone ringing interrupts the moment. Graves answers, his voice tense but controlled. The call came from an unexpected source, Harrison. He wanted to meet. He had information on Kincaid, something that Graves needed to hear. But Graves knew better than to trust a man like Harrison. This meeting could be a trap. Or worse. Graves hangs up the phone, his chair scraping against the floor as he stands. Graves didn't have much of a choice. If Harrison had information on Kincaid, he needed to hear it. But he would go into this meeting prepared, knowing that in this game, everyone had something to lose. The meeting, evening. The sound of soft jazz music plays in the background, mingling with the quiet murmur of voices in a dimly lit bar. Glasses clink softly as drinks are poured. Graves steps into the bar, his footsteps slow and deliberate. The bar was quiet, the kind of place where people came to disappear. Graves spotted Harrison sitting in the back, a glass of whiskey in his hand. He moved through the room cautiously, every sense on high alert. Graves sits down across from Harrison, the sound of the chair scraping lightly on the floor. The tension is thick between them. Harrison didn't waste time. "Kincaid's a problem," he said, his voice low but steady. "He's gone rogue. He's no longer just following orders. He's taking matters into his own hands." Graves remained silent, letting Harrison continue. Harrison leaned forward, his eyes sharp and calculating. "You want Kincaid? I can help you find him. But you need to understand he's not working alone anymore. There are others involved, and if you're not careful, you'll end up like Victoria." The sound of ice clinking in Harrison's glass as he takes a slow sip. Graves listened, but he didn't trust a word of it. Harrison had his own agenda, he always did. But if what he said was true, then Kincaid was more dangerous than Graves had realized. The sound of a glass being set down softly on the table. Graves stands, his chair scraping the floor again as he pushes it back. As Graves left the bar, Harrison's words echoed in his mind. Kincaid wasn't just following orders anymore, he was making his own moves, and that made him unpredictable. But it also made him vulnerable. Graves' footsteps echo through the bar as he exits, the quiet murmur of voices fading behind him. Rooftop chase, night. The sound of rain intensifies, now pounding heavily against the rooftops of the city. Graves' footsteps echo as he runs across a narrow rooftop, the wind howling through the night. Graves had followed the lead Harrison had given him, and it had led him here to a rooftop chase through the darkened city. Kincaid was close, just ahead, his silhouette barely visible in the rain. But Graves wasn't giving up. Not now. The sound of heavy breathing, shoes slipping on the wet rooftop. Graves' footsteps quicken as he closes the gap. Kincaid moved fast, but Graves was faster. He could see the man now, his coat flapping in the wind, his movements frantic as he tried to escape. But there was nowhere left to run. The sound of a gunshot rings out, echoing across the rooftop. Graves dives to the side, his body hitting the wet surface with a thud. The shot missed, but only by inches. Graves rolled to his feet, gun drawn, his eyes locking on Kincaid as he took aim. But Kincaid didn't fire again. He just stood there, rain dripping from his face, a cold smile on his lips. The sound of rain and wind continues, the tension thick in the air. "You should have stayed out of this, Graves," Kincaid said, his voice barely audible over the storm. "But now it's too late." Graves doesn't respond, his gun still trained on Kincaid. The two men stand there for a moment, rain pouring down around them. For a moment, everything was still. And then, without warning, Kincaid turned and leapt off the rooftop, disappearing into the shadows below. Graves ran to the edge, but Kincaid was gone, swallowed by the night. Graves stands there for a moment, breathing heavily, rain still pouring down. The sound of distant sirens wails faintly in the background. The sound of typing fills the air again, rhythmic and deliberate. The rain continues softly in the background. Somewhere in the city, in a darkened room, a message was being sent. Fingers tapped against a keyboard, a conversation unfolding between unseen players. "Graves is getting closer," the message read. "Kincaid failed. Prepare for the next move." The typing stops. The faint sound of rain grows louder, filling the silence. Graves had come closer than ever before. But Kincaid had slipped away once again. The game wasn't over yet, and the people pulling the strings were already preparing their next move. But Graves wouldn't stop. Not now. Not when the truth was so close. Next time, on Silent Shadows.